Hello. Good evening. On behalf of the University of Washington Debate Union and the Department of Communication, I'd like to welcome you to the Gerry Philipsen Debate Forum. My name's Dr. Michael Souders, and I'm the director of the University of Washington Debate Union. Tonight's a really exciting night for me and for the Debate Union, because tonight we set into stone the existence of this new debate series that we've been engaged in, and in doing so, seek to honor Dr. Gerry Philipsen for his contributions to our department, to our field, and to our brand new debate program. This event, the Philipsen Forum, will be an annual event of the Debate Union, and it's a little different from most public debate events. It involves competitors on two sides of a topic, but the really interesting part about the Philipsen Forum is that it doesn't involve skilled practice debaters of the UW Debate Union. Instead, as an enactment of our belief that debate isn't just for a few practice specialists, but is an important public skill, the debate features competitors who have no background in debate, and before tonight have never competed in a live debate. Not that they're unprepared. The six students you see in front of you, have worked with their support teams, who are their whole classes, in order to get ready for the debate tonight for 4 weeks. Tonight's debate's actually the third of a series of 3 and the final one. And if any of the past 2 debates we had, one of which was on gun control, the other one which was on NSA spying, or any indication, I think you'll be impressed about what you see. These debates have demonstrated, and I think will continue to demonstrate, that debate's an excellent tool for teaching, learning, and most importantly, for giving students the opportunity to take what they know and make that knowledge come alive in argumentation. I want to take a moment to talk about the University of Washington Debate Union and what it is. The debate program is a brand new feature of the Department of Communication. Over the past couple of years, the department discussed and then committed itself to the idea that debate is a part of a rigorous education for undergraduates. The commitment of the program is threefold, and if you've been at any of the 2 previous debates, you've heard me say this before. First, we're dedicated to improving and promoting civic dialogue on the UW campus. Second, we seek to improve and deepen the quality of discourse in our greater Pacific Northwest community. And finally, our goal is to create and maintain an excellent intercollegiate debate team that gives students a chance to test their debate skills against the best competitors in the nation. Already this year, we've done quite a bit. We've held a panel on the experiences of women in advocacy. We've volunteered at high school debate tournaments. We've created a student organization to promote debate on campus. And we've created and organized this debate series. As we head toward winter and spring, we're planning a monthly open debate forum, planning on getting more engaged in the high school community, and train to get ready for intercollegiate competition in 2014 and 2015. So let me take a moment here to introduce you to some of the young men and women that are part of the University of Washington Debate Union, so you can see what they look like. I've had them stand up before, but let me name them off. They're not all here. We have Zach McGearing. You guys want to stand up? Zach McGearing, who's our president. Tim Pollard, who's our vice president. Blair Lohman, I saw you here. There you are. Who's our outreach chair. Ben Owens, who is our social chair. Nathan Sheely, who I don't have a title for here. Sorry, Nathan. Eric Seeley, are you here? Nope. Dylan Thomas, who is one of our officers, but I forget your title, Dylan. Madison Shin.
Night class.
Oh, she has a night class tonight. It's too bad Madison's not here, because she was involved in the debate on Tuesday, and that was her first ever live debate and did an excellent job in that debate. And of course, we have Margot Littman, who is our graduate student advisor to the program and helps me put the program together. That's the people who are involved in the program. We hope to have more people. Just have a seat. A lot of you are students in the COM 334 class, and if you're considering debate, I'd like to emphasize to you that our program is open to all of the students who are interested. Most of the students you saw standing don't have a background in debate. The people who are up here don't have a background in debate. Debate is something that is an incredible experience for those people who have never tried it before. And while it's not for everyone after they try it, I think that if you give it a chance, you'll enjoy it. We're just getting started as a program, and I think you'll hear more of us in the future. But while tonight's about debate, it's also about recognizing Dr. Gerry Philipsen, himself a former debater at the University of Denver. For those of us who attended the Women in Advocacy panel in October, you already know that Dr. Philipsen is a fierce advocate of debate and the important way that it empowers students and promotes learning. As I sort of stand here and talk about debate, I wish I could, instead of talking about debate, could instead play a clip from that panel where Dr. Philipsen explained why debate helps empower people, and have him do that for me every single time. Just press play, like, hey, you want to know why debate's important? Observe, click. For a debater, for somebody who believes that debate's important and works for students, that it promotes learning and serves as a means of finding and testing knowledge, it was like lightning in a bottle. But I'm not really the best person to talk about Gerry Philipsen's 35 years of teaching, scholarship, and service in this department and university and field. That job I'm going to turn over briefly to Dr. Lisa Kutu, who's not only a faculty member in this department, but was Dr. Philipsen's advisee and co-author. So let me step aside for a moment, let Lisa talk about.
This is also my first debate. It's my absolute pleasure to talk about Professor Philipsen. He was Professor Philipsen to me for many years before he became my colleague, and I have worked with him for the last 23 years in the Department of Speech Communication and then Communication. When I joined the Department of Speech Communication, we had a lively debate program, and when that was cut, there was some sadness among all of us, but I think for Professor Philipsen it was particularly profound. I don't think it goes too far to say that debate is a part of his intellectual DNA. It is how he is put together. And from the many lunches I have had with him over the last 23 years, I can tell you that he never stops teaching it. He was a debater, as Mick said, at the University of Denver as an undergraduate from 1963 to 1967. I will refrain from talking about my age during that time. Many of you probably don't even remember the 60s. However, it's a useful thing to think about, that a man who is about to retire, who did something in the 1960s that you are doing today, thinks that it is so important and was so influential in his life that he comes out today to support you, that his name has been put on this debate forum, and that this is one of the passions that will drive him through his retirement. I think that just shows how meaningful debate can be across your entire life. In addition to simply being a debater, he was an excellent debater. He was a U.S. international debater who toured 26 British university debate unions, including Oxford and Cambridge. I can tell you that witnessing his work across the university over the last couple of decades, he has used this debate and skill in the faculty senate, which, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically the faculty's voice in the university in negotiating its relationship with the administration and how they want to be in this world that we share. He has also brought his debate experience to every single classroom that he's taught with. I've taught with him. He doesn't leave the notion of debating issues at the classroom door. And he has mentored 35 PhDs, which is a remarkable number of students, and has taught tens of thousands of undergraduates. Apparently, according to his own account, his debating has also been a part of his personal life, as his wife, Marie, remarked soon after their marriage that he clearly had a, quote, degree in argument. So this is important. Debate will not only help you professionally, but apparently personally. Today is a momentous day, not only because it marks the beginning of this debate forum, but also because it marks the last day that Professor Philipsen will have taught a face-to-face class at the University of Washington or anywhere else. There is no doubt to me that he will continue to teach in other venues. But the one nearest and dearest to his heart, I also have no doubt will be debate. Whether he is observing you, not able to control his coaching of you, or judging you in some way. This forum is named in his honor, and that provides him a wonderful opportunity to continue to work with young debaters. I believe that it provides him an incredible gift in his retirement to do what actually he started out doing as a communicator, to be in the world of debate. But I also think it provides us a wonderful opportunity a rationale for not letting him go too far away, too quickly from us during the beginning of his retirement and hopefully long thereafter. So congratulations on the naming of this forum. It is certainly well deserved.
It's one of my significant regrets that I'll only, considering Lisa's remarks, that I'll only overlap here at UW with Dr. Philipsen for 1 quarter. It's a very short time. And I do know that something I want to say is I've been involved in debate for 19 years, since I was 14 years old. I've had a very busy quarter, but Dr. Phillips and I have only had a couple opportunities to talk. But in those short periods of time, and as a debater, I've had the opportunity to be around some of the best debate coaches, best debaters, best scholars of debate in the world. And what I think is really interesting is that being around Dr. Philipsen, even for these short periods of time, I have learned so much. The ratio of time spent to learning about the history of debate and what it can do is immense. And it's probably the most educational, compact period of time, spending time with someone that I've had about the tradition of debate and what it is. And I'm glad that we have that. I'm glad that we have somebody like Dr. Philipsen who believes that debate is valuable. And hopefully through this forum and through these debates like this, we can carry on that idea. Tonight's debate is an interesting one. Our topic is as follows. Resolved, food that contains genetically modified organisms should be labeled. I'll say that one more time. Resolved, food that contains genetically modified organisms should be labeled. Topic should be familiar to most people here in this audience. Voters in Washington State recently rejected Initiative 522, which would have required foods labeled as required certain foods labeled genetically engineered. The campaign that opposed I-522 was one of the most expensive initiative campaigns in Washington. Was the most expensive initiative campaign in Washington history, and outspent its opponents who were in favor of it 2.5 to 1. The campaign, which was outspent 2.5 to 1, was also one of the largest initiative campaign efforts made. It's quite a bit of money spent. The Seattle PI reported that the money in the campaign seems to have played a pretty vital role. Support for I-522 tracked fairly closely to the spending rate of the No on 522 campaign. The more money that was pumped into the campaign, the more opposition turned against it, indicating that spending in the campaign had a pretty close correlation with public opinion rates. But the campaign didn't resolve the arguments behind labeling of genetically modified food, and some of the campaign issues did more to cloud what constitutes what constitutes the true arguments about whether or not food should be labeled as genetically modified or not. Polls still show that parents are concerned about the impact of GM foods on their children, and campaign efforts around the country to create similar initiatives in states that have initiative processes or legislative efforts in states that don't are revving up in other places like Massachusetts and other locations. So in the post-522 environment, it makes sense that we take a look at some of the arguments for and against food labeling and an opportunity to gain a little more clarity on them. So that's what our debaters tonight are going to do. And let me introduce the speakers. To you. And let me remind you of the courage of these students. I mentioned before, while they've practiced and prepared a great deal, they've never before engaged in a live debate, much less a public one with senior faculty members watching them and seeing how they do, and being told that this is a very important event which honors a very senior faculty member who we just talked about. So it's a great challenge, and I think to some extent we should commend them for taking it on. And they've had some nerves. I've had some nerves. Speaking for the affirmative, which is sitting on this side this time, we have Rachel Spivey, James Boker, and Sean Tramble. Speaking for the negative, we have Emma Brown, Nathan Taft, and Pavan Walia. And those are the teams. I'll explain the format very briefly. Each speaker from each team will deliver a 5-minute speech on their side of the proposition. We'll begin with the affirmative and go every other speech for 4 speeches total to start out with. At the end of those 4 speeches, I'm going to open up the floor to questions for 10 minutes for the students. Anybody in the audience may ask questions of the students at that point in time. Please keep your questions relatively brief. I will allow you to follow up, so if you don't think they answer your questions and you sort of want to re-challenge or redirect, you may do that. But please give others a chance to ask questions in that 10-minute period. You'll find out that 10 minutes isn't very long, and lots of people ask questions. On Tuesday, we found out 10 minutes was not nearly enough time for how the audience felt about the subject. After the question and answer period, each side will deliver one more rebuttal speech. That'll be 5 minutes long. Following the rebuttal, I'll ask Dr. Philipsen for a reaction to the debate, and then we'll sort of move out and we'll conclude, and that'll be it. It'll go much faster than you think it will, trust me. During the debate, I'll moderate, and you'll hear a couple of things happen. Mainly their time signals. I'll sort of give them a transition. You'll hear, when the speaker has 1 minute left, you'll hear me hit my gavel or plank or whatever this is. So it'll sound like this. So you don't be shocked when you hear the sound. That's the 1 minute mark. And then we're also going to we have tried to figure out a way to signal that the time is over in a way that's insistent but non-intrusive. That's also come up to the plank. So you'll hear this when their time's up, and that'll be the end of their time. We'll move along relatively quickly, and the debate should move easily. They've practiced hard for it. I think they're going to do very well. So let me turn the floor over to the competitors. I'm going to be sitting down here. You'll hear me speak and introduce people. And let me scoot out of the way. So first of all, I'd like to recognize Rachel Spivey to deliver the first affirmative construction.
One week ago, the Institute for Responsible Technology released a report stating that 18 million Americans have gluten-related illnesses due to genetically modified foods. The IRT states that the growing number of allergies are due to an environmental trigger caused by the introduction of genetically modified organisms to the American food supply. The reality of this dire situation is that we have all been consuming genetically modified organisms since the mid-1990s. In case you do not know what genetically modified organisms are, they are plants or animals that have been created through gene splicing biotechnology. For example, plants are modified in labs in order to enhance desired traits such as increased resistance to herbicides or improved nutritional content. Yet these altered genetic traits are unrecognizable to species in our environment. Therefore, GMOs are creating detrimental environmental damage and serious health risks. Unfortunately, the fact is, many people do not realize the massive amount of GMOs that they are consuming, and this is mainly because of the lack of labeling. We are not trying to ban GMOs. We are trying to raise awareness in order to educate people on the severe negative consequences GMOs will have in our environment and our health. Labeling will give people a choice and grant them the right to know what they are consuming. Let me explain further. Nearly every pre-made food product has genetically modified organisms in it. Most likely your favorite tortilla chips found at Costco or Safeway contain genetically modified corn and canola oil. The chicken teriyaki you had for dinner is really just a big plate of genetically modified organisms. The chicken was fed genetically modified grain, the teriyaki sauce was made from genetically modified soybeans, and the rice was genetically modified. My point being that people have no idea that our main staples, such as corn, rice, and soy, are predominantly all genetically modified. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine urges doctors to prescribe non-GMO diets for all patients. They attest that the studies conducted on animals possess organ damage, gastrointestinal damage, immune system disorders, accelerated aging, and infertility. The American Academy of Environmental Medicine stressed that GMOs store matter within our bodies, which cause long-term health problems. The long-term effects of GMOs on the environment are equally toxic. GMO crops require millions of pounds of herbicide each year to thrive, and Monsanto is the creator of this herbicide. Monsanto has very deep pockets, and they reach very wide. They have several former executives working in the USDA and the FDA. They were the #1 contributor against Washington's Initiative 522 and are largely responsible for the perpetuation and growth of GMOs. Monsanto's Roundup-ready crops and herbicides have resulted in the creation of superweeds. The New York Times recently addressed the issue of superweeds by stating that farmers across America are being forced to spray fields with more toxic herbicides and return to more labor-intensive methods like regular plowing. Farm experts say that such efforts could reach to higher food prices, lower crop yields, rising farm costs, and more pollution of land and water. The New York Times states that superweeds are the single largest threat to production agriculture that farmers have ever seen. During the recent 522 initiative, the Seattle Times attested that the costs of labeling have been falsely estimated based on the assumption that all food producers will opt to reformulate products with costlier organic ingredients rather than use the new labels. The costs of labeling are minimal compared to the cost of what GMOs will do to our environment and our personal health. The negative team will claim labeling will increase the price of food. Yet what would the cost be like if bees do not pollinate our crops anymore? Superweeds destroy our nation's agriculture, or our health starts declining. Labeling will enforce companies to be truthful about what they are putting into our food. Labeling could lead to better practices for growing our food. Labeling could remove toxic GMO-saturated foods from the market. Labeling could increase production of non-GM food in order to lower food costs. We should not be afraid to label our food. Why be fearful of something that is supposedly not bad for you?
Thank you very much. I'd now like to recognize Emma Brown to deliver the first negative constructive, not to last longer than 5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, the labeling of genetically modified food is a hotly debated issue across the United States and abroad. The debate over labeling hit home in November when Washington turned down Initiative 522, which would have required genetically modified food to be labeled as such. Like the majority of Washington state, we believe that genetically modified foods should not be labeled. The phrase genetically modified food itself serves as a very general term that includes a wide variety of products. Anything from food in the testing phase to food being sold on the market can be generally called genetically modified. However, this debate, when framed as an argument specifically over labeling, cannot use genetically modified foods as a general term. Only a specific subset of genetically modified food can be considered in this argument, and that is genetically modified food that has been tested and approved for sale. This is not a debate over whether genetically modified food is good or bad, but rather a debate over whether or not foods that have been approved for market should carry labels. In support of labeling, the affirmative team has asserted that GMO foods cause severe environmental damage and health risks. However, we will show that science refutes these claims. They also claim that we have a right to know what's in our food. However, labeling would be misleading. And in fact, yes, if you guys went home tonight and you had dinner and looked down at your plate, it's likely that there are going to be GMOs on that plate. However, you went to the store and purchased products that had been tested and approved. They are safe for you to eat. That is what you are eating. Again, we strongly believe that genetically modified foods should not be labeled because, 1, GM foods are approved for sale and they are safe to eat. 2, labeling genetically modified foods would only cause unrest and confusion over perfectly safe foods. 3, labeling genetically modified food is unnecessary. And 4, labeling genetically modified food will raise the cost of food. First of all, genetically modified foods that have been approved for sale are safe, and the science is on our side. Over 2,000 studies have been reviewed by credible independent sources like the World Health Organization, the European Union's Joint Research Center, the United States Joint Research Council, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and these conclude that genetically modified foods that have been approved for market are safe to eat. There are simply more studies denying or refuting health and environmental risks than claiming them. Secondly, labeling would only cause unrest and confusion over perfectly safe foods. Genetically modified foods that have reached the market are safe. They have been tested, regulated, and approved by organizations such as the FDA and the USDA, as well as the companies that produce the products. Labeling products that have gone through this approval process only causes consumers to mistake the concept of a food being genetically modified with being dangerous to consume, even though science tells us otherwise. The affirmative may claim that we have a right to know, but do you really want to know misleading information? Third, labeling genetically modified food is unnecessary. We already have a system of labeling in place in the United States that is able to inform consumers whether their food contains GMOs, and that is USDA-approved organic labeling. For a food to be labeled as organic, it cannot be produced using genetic modification from any step, from farm to plate. So if people are worried about consuming genetically modified foods, they can purchase organic and rest assured that they are not eating these foods. Finally, labeling genetically modified food would increase the cost of food, not only for farmers and producers, but for consumers as well. If the public has been trained to fear GMOs, they will be less willing to purchase GMO-labeled foods, therefore causing manufacturers to switch to more expensive non-GMO ingredients, which would increase the cost of the final product, therefore increasing the cost for both producers and consumers. So what happens when food prices increase? Families have to take money from other parts of their budget and spend it on food. People have to choose cheaper food just so they can eat. And we know that the cheapest food is often the least healthy. Those are foods that we know the health risks of. There is a difference between informing consumers and misleading them, and that is exactly what labeling GM foods would do. They would mislead all of you. Ultimately, GM foods that have been approved for market are safe for the environment and they are safe to eat. We have the majority of scientific research on our side. We believe, once again, that GMO foods should not be labeled. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll recognize James Boker to deliver the second affirmative constructive in favor of the proposition.
The affirmative stands for awareness. Food that contains genetically modified organisms should be labeled to indicate the presence of GMOs. By labeling GM foods, people can make educated decisions about the food they are buying. Referring back to Rachel's points made, genetically modified organisms pose a detrimental threat to our overall health in ourselves as well as our environment. With the enactment of labeling GMOs, we would better our personal health as individuals and create a more sustainable environment. And despite popular belief, labeling GM foods may actually be may have little to no costs. And I would like to take a moment to expand on those points she has made. The environmental impacts of genetically modified foods overwhelmingly point toward the negative. Some of the most prominent risks include the development of herbicide-resistant weeds and negative effects on beneficial organisms that are not a target of GMOs. Research done by Union of Concerned Scientists shows that millions of acres of U.S. farmland are now infested by weeds that have become resistant. That have become resistant to the herbicide glyphosate. Overuse of Monsanto's Roundup Ready trait, which is engineered to tolerate the herbicide, has promoted the accelerated development of resistance in several weed species, thus creating what are known as superweeds. To combat these superweeds, farmers have turned to older and more toxic pesticides. However, over time, the chemicals killed enzymes in the soil, requiring the farmer to supplement the plant's needed nutrients with more chemicals to get the proper yields. In this cycle of chemical dependency, the soil and land eventually become sterile, deeming the land unfarmable. The negative, as stated, the environment is not affected by GMOs. However, honeybees are being ravaged by the production of GMOs. Population of bees are on the decline, and in an article done by Science Daily, they stated, it appears that the bees' immune systems have become compromised, further stating it is likely due to the chemical pesticides commonly used in the U.S. to treat crops. Bees are an essential part of our agricultural system. These tireless workers pollinate over 80% of our flowering crops, which constitute about a third of everything we eat. Aside from the environmental impacts, side effects of GMOs on humans as well as animals are clearly present and pose serious health concerns. In a study done by the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, it found that reproductive issues caused by GM foods have been occurring around the globe. In India, most buffalo that ate GM cottonseed had complications such as premature deliveries, miscarriages, infertility, and prolapsed uteruses. Many calves died. Also in the U.S., many farmers reported that thousands of pigs have become sterile after consuming certain GM corn varieties. Some had false pregnancies and others gave birth to bags of water. In a human study conducted to test GMOs, the Roundup Ready gene from soy was found in bacteria within the gut of humans. Most worrying, these studies show the potential for bacteria within the human body to become resistant to antibiotics. The estimated labeling costs by our opponents have in fact been exaggerated. The negative claims Initiative 522 would increase the price of food, and that a 3-person household would have to increase their food budget from around $200 to $520 a year. But that estimate is based upon an assumption that if labeling were required, food producers would immediately change to entirely to non-engineered or organic ingredients, as found in an article done by the Seattle Times. However, this assumption is not realistic, and in the long run, consumers will not see a major price increase. The negative states it will lead to widespread unrest and false panic, but do you really think that there will be panic onset if there is a label added to our already much labeled products? Similar historical situations have also proved this panic to be false. For example, when warning labels were introduced on tobacco products, panic did not set in. In 1965, cigarette companies began using warning labels. Within 5 years, cigarette sales began to decline. The percent of Americans who smoke has fallen dramatically since 1970, from nearly 40% to about 19% in a study done by USA Today. Since this decline in sales due to warning labels, cigarette companies have been searching for a safer product, and more than 150 patents related to designing safe cigarettes have been filed in the past 25 years. Labeling GM foods will lead to a healthier future for our environment and create greater personal health. We need to label GMOs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll recognize Nathan Taft to deliver the second negative, constructive, in opposition to the proposition.
Our society is riddled with science deniers. There are people who deny climate change, evolution, the efficacy of vaccines, people who even deny the existence of AIDS. The list goes on and on. However, tonight we're here to talk about GMOs and whether or not we should label them. But what does the science actually say? It says that GM foods approved for market pose no risk to humans and little to no risk to the environment. This statement has been endorsed by organizations like the EU, the U.S. Joint Research Council, the American Medical Association, and the National Academy of the Sciences, just to name a few. And the affirmative has also argued that it has not been sufficiently studied. But in fact, there are over 2,000 studies done worldwide, and almost all of them concluded that GM foods approved for market are not harmful for human consumption, and that there is a sustainable environmental impact. The Genetic Engineering Risk Atlas is a database available online aggregating over 1,700 of these studies into one place that you can go home and look up and look at these studies yourself. These are studies from multiple organizations such as the Aquaculture Nutrition Journal, the Journal of the Food Hygienic Society of Japan, and the Professional Animal Scientists Journal. All over the world, people are concluding the same thing. GM foods that approved for market are safe for human consumption and are not harmful to the environment. Now, that's not to say every single study is on our side, because with anything, with climate change, with evolution, there are studies that point the other way, and then if there's one or two studies like that, the other side likes to say there's a controversy. But there isn't. The small amount of studies on their side, there was one, our friend Rachel in the affirmative pointed to organ damage. It was a study on rats, and it was published in the Food and Chemical Toxicology Journal. This study, however, was recently withdrawn just this past week, citing poor methodology and almost unanimous scientific consensus that this was a bad study. Our friend James on the affirmative also mentioned buffalo in India eating cotton seeds. But again, I'd like to remind the audience that we're talking about foods that have been approved for market, that are already going there and have been regulated. The affirmative has also talked about bees and how GMOs are contributing to declines in bee population. But there are a significantly large amount of other factors that are linked more closely to the decline in bee population, such as climate change, such as electromagnetic radiation from cell phone towers, and parasites. The affirmative has also argued that we have a right to know what's in our food. However, like we said before, like Emma pointed out, this is pointless because we already have organic labeling. If you don't want to eat something that has GMOs in it, you don't have to. The FDA mandates that anything carrying an organic label cannot contain any GMO or GMO ingredients at all. So if you want to pay more for foods that are just as safe as genetically modified ones, go for it. But don't pass the cost on to the rest of society. And it's not just a little bit of cost. It's a lot. The Washington Research Council estimated during the I-522 campaign that $264 million in Washington state alone would be added to production costs of food. This translates to, on the low end, $200 more per month per family for a family of 4 on their food budget, and on the high end, $520 more per month for a family of 4. That may not sound like a lot to you, but here are the facts. The Economic Policy Institute estimated a family of 4 in the Seattle area already needs to spend $754 on food. This means that a family at the poverty line right now already spends 38% of their income on food. 38%. This increase on the low end will raise that number to 49%. Nearly half of their budget will be spent on food. If it's the high end and it's a worst case scenario and it raises it by $520, it's going to raise it to 65% of their budget. 2/3 of a poor family's budget will be spent on food. Food that can't go to education, to shelter, to heat, and to water. Ultimately, the science is on our side in this debate. Labeling GMOs is pointless, and it will raise food prices, and the poorest members of our society will be the hardest hit. Labeling GMOs is a bad idea with bad consequences, and we assert that it should not be done. Thank you.
So now we'll move to the next phase in the debate, which is an open question and answer period. And we have 10 minutes set aside for that. Now we'll ask Dr. Philipsen if he would like to have the first question. He doesn't have to. You can decline.
I'll pass.
Okay, got it. Fair enough. So let me open up the floor for questions for 10 minutes. Go ahead.
I noticed that the affirmative team.
Not to me, to them.
I noticed that the affirmative team qualified their, the negative team qualified their argument for GMOs by stating that it's safe for foods that are brought to market. And I was wondering what effect that the GMOs have on the environment with food that isn't brought to market.
Well, I know that the database I was talking about, the Genetic Engineering Risk Atlas, which you guys can go look up for yourselves at home, 68% of those studies are on environmental impact of GM and GMOs in general. So, and this is the same database that has been reviewed by the World Health Organization and the EU and the US Joint Research Council. So there is an effect on the environment, but the science has shown overwhelmingly that it is sustainable and, if done correctly, should not pose much of a risk.
Dr. McGarry.
I have a question for the affirmative on basically the same thing on environmental impact. So it seems as if you're talking about two things. We've got environmental impact. We should label for awareness because of potential environmental impacts and because of personal health risks. So there's a clash on this point about whether or not there's a health risk, and it sounds like there's a clash on the point of whether or not there's an environmental impact. But let me take a step further back and say, even if there is an environmental impact, why should that affect the labeling at all? So the production of chicken that we would buy, done in huge farms, tremendously negative environmental impacts, but we don't label it because it had an environmental impact. We're labeling it because of personal health risk. So it seems like the environmental impact is almost irrelevant to the case of labeling for individual consumers.
So, I'm sorry, what exactly is your question?
So the question is, does it even matter if you prove environmental impact? That seems beyond the range of this particular debate in terms of labeling about the presence or absence of GMOs for individual consumers.
I think one of the reasons that we are focusing on the environmental impact is because the impact that it has on the environment correlates back to our economy. It correlates back to our general health. So if bees are dying and they aren't able to properly pollinate the rest of our crops, we're not going to be able to feed our communities as effectively. And that has an adverse effect on our economy in like manner, because then the price of food goes up. So you see, it's kind of this tumbling effect that goes on because GMOs are present in those said crops, if that makes sense.
Go ahead.
So this is a question for the negative side. You guys mentioned the European Union a few times, and you said that the European Union Joint Research Center agrees that GMOs are not harmful. Then why are they banned in the European Union in 28 nations?
I don't think they're banned. I think they're labeled. They required labeling in the EU.
I think that I can try to feel this one. I think when at least I was doing my research, a lot of the reasons for why GMOs are banned in Europe are not necessarily completely scientifically motivated. There are a lot of political motivators there. So my best answer to that question is that there is a lot of political motivation that is behind that we may know of or we may not know of, but there is definitely a huge politically motivating factor there.
All the way to the back.
So for the negative team, the labels that we have on foods today, I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember, also caused the same kind of controversy when it was suggested, salt, fat, and yet food prices didn't go up and people didn't panic in the streets. So why do you think that this would be a bigger impact than the original label?
I guess I think the biggest point for me is that the nutritional labels that were added, such as salt and cholesterol content, those items have been proven, and the science supports the idea that these are actually harmful for you, and we need to know about them. And there's also a dichotomy with GM foods and organic foods. A lot of the cost prices are because manufacturers will switch to organic foods, which is inherently more expensive. You can't switch to food without cholesterol as easily. So that was a lot of the cost. It was just there was more of a warning process, I guess. And on top of that, there is no real risk to GM foods, so it would just be unnecessary. Even if it only raises costs a little bit, it's something that's unnecessary of why put more burden on low-income families when you don't have to.
You go right here.
You voiced concern about the cost going to people, the individuals purchasing the products. It's going to go up, $300 to $500 a month, and yet billions were spent fighting one proposal in one state. Are we to believe that that was just spent out of the kindness of your heart? I imagine that's going to also be passed on to the product, right?
I'm sorry.
So the companies that are fighting against labeling with GMO foods spent billions to oppose that, and yet you're like, oh, but if we put the labels on, well, that's going to cost a lot to the consumer. But where do those billions come from? Of course, those go to the consumer as well, right? You're taking those from the consumer.
I think predominantly in that case, the consumer has already paid for the product, thus the producer already has that money to spend. But in this case, the consumer would have to start paying more on top of that for when labels are put on the product, if that makes sense. It would be in a reverse way. It's like going from a savings account to going to like a negative balance, if that makes sense.
Let's go back.
Yeah, so if GMOs were to be labeled to make you aware of GMO, it would probably attract consumers to buy organic food. Would organic food also be labeled and warn consumers of the molds and less susceptibility to insect transfer disease that create them as dangerous products?
I think we would argue that they should be. Currently, we're dealing with labeling just GMOs. Organic has, as the negative has pointed out, their own system of labeling, and that's been put in place as of now. As you pointed out, there may or may not be some flaws associated with that, but I think that GMOs too need to be labeled in like manner.
Go ahead, Blair.
So we have passed initiatives in the past for labeling foods that for better nutritional content. Like at McDonald's now, you see that there's you can see how many calories you're eating, and trying to fight the problem with childhood obesity and obesity within the nation. Why do you think that labeling would solve this problem when it hasn't solved problems in the past regarding food?
Well, I think we're looking to create awareness. We're not stating that this is going to solve these problems that we're faced with these health concerns and these environmental impacts. But we're saying that it's going to create an awareness so that people can make the choice.
Just to kind of add on that point, like you said, the whole calorie and salt and cholesterol creates awareness about these aspects so that consumers have the right to make these health-conscious choices. We're just transferring that to GMO products too.
Hurry.
A question for the negative team about the science. How do you resolve the conflict of the fact that independent researchers are not permitted to do research on Monsanto genetically modified specimens? It's actually in their contract. You are not permitted to do any research that they themselves do not fund. So I just want to know how you reconcile these scientific studies, supposedly independent, when Monsanto and the other groups don't actually permit specimens to be sampled by independent groups.
That is a really tough question, I think, and how I would answer that is I would say if this basically blocking of the allowance to do studies had resulted in only a handful of studies being able to be done, if it were only 100 studies, if it were only 200 or 500 studies, then I think that would be more cause for concern. But the fact that even though that is a problem, over 2,000 studies have still been able to be done that have reached conclusive or quality evidence. So I think that really speaks to that point. If it were only a few number of studies having been done, then that I think would be a problem. But there are still, an overwhelming number of studies that have been able to be done.
And if I may jump on the back of that, the idea, these studies, they're all available. They're being aggregated online in that database that you can go look at, and they've all been evaluated by these big organizations that, that I would hope that the World Health Organization and, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Medical Association, the National Academies of Sciences, and dozens of other reputable organizations have reviewed these studies and said that they are safe. If you can't trust them, who can you trust? I guess.
I'll stay over one more question. So let's go right there.
Okay, so you had mentioned previously that the FDA had approved genetically modified organisms, yet the FDA has really strong ties to Monsanto, so who's a leading organization in the non-favoring labeling GMOs. So how can you say that foods are safe if the food safety regulations are being passed by organizations like Monsanto?
That's a really good question. It's something good to think about. I would say that once again, that is getting pretty deep into politics. It's getting pretty deep into what may be, conspiracy theory type things where people say, well, if people in the FDA used to work for Monsanto, they must be falsifying their claims. They must be falsifying their studies. But I think political motivations exist, but I don't believe that in those types of organizations where they have the health and the well-being of our citizens in mind, I do not believe that those political motivations would cause people in the FDA and USDA to falsify what they are saying in their official reports.
All right. A lot of questions we got in there. That was a good job. Rapid. So we'll move to the final phase of the debate, in which we'll hear the final two rebuttals from the speakers. So I would like to recognize Sean Tramble to deliver the affirmative rebuttal.
So the labeling of GMOs brings into question the rights that we as consumers have into choosing what we choose to consume. Now, we've covered a lot of topics tonight, but I want to go back and kind of step by step go through these and look at some of the details concerning these topics. The negative has cited the World Health Organization and the FDA as prominent sources for promoting the safety of GMOs. I'd like to note that on the World Health Organization site, they noted this: the risk is real, as was shown when traces of maize type, which was only approved for feed use, appeared in maize products for human consumption in the United States of America. So what happened here was that GMO products only approved for feed use was found in our food. That's obviously a problem. I'd also like to note that, as the audience noted, at least 7 high-ranking employees in the FDA have had an employment with the Monsanto company. This creates a culture of a biased atmosphere towards helping and aiding GMO products to reach the market. I feel like that's a problem. We've also talked a lot about cost. As poor college students, we want to keep our budgets low. We don't want to be spending too much, as you all know. 58% of American people prefer organic products. And 61% of those people are low income. They make between $25,000 and $50,000 a year. But they still prefer to buy these organic products. This shows that we as an American society have a push, have a need, have a want for healthier products. The Seattle Times looked into 522 and analyzed the cost structure. They noted, during no single year, under the official state estimate, would regulatory costs exceed $1 million. And that estimate doesn't even factor in any revenue the state would also likely receive from civil fines and other fees that would help reduce overall costs. So when looking at it in layman's terms, we have 6 million people here living in Washington. This means that it would only cost us around 18 cents annually to fund this labeling initiative. I think we all can afford about 2 dimes to this labeling initiative a year. we've also talked a lot about the environmental effects. They have cited, once again, these 2,000 studies as a reference material that we shouldn't be worried about environmental effects. But I think we should, and here's an example why. Just this last summer in Oregon, a wheat harvester had a problem getting rid of a portion of his wheat crops. He tried spraying pesticides on it, and it wouldn't kill them. He ended up sending this wheat to a lab. The results were very interesting. It turns out that this wheat was GMO wheat. He didn't plant seeds that were GMO made. FDA does not approve GMO wheat. So this shows that there was a horizontal transfer of genes into his crops. That's troubling. We're affecting outside crops that weren't meant to be contaminated with GMOs. Japan got wind of this. They canceled 25,000 tons of wheat order. This is affecting our economy. It's affecting our environment. And it also has health implications. So in conclusion, at the end of the day, the discussion around labeling GMOs comes to just that, a simple and effective label that would raise awareness about the product to consumers who want to take the time to look. This act is by no means dangerous or harmful to our society or our economy. In honor of the late Nelson Mandela, I'd like to note that he said education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world. Putting a labeling system upon GMO products would aid in educating consumers. Having an educated public places a spotlight on companies such as Monsanto in the GMO industry, and it forces them to produce higher quality products for us to consume through more safe and ethical means, while continually improving the studies that look at their effects. Labeling GMOs will return the basic rights to consumers because it gives us the freedom to a healthy lifestyle and the agency to choose what we want to consume. Thank you.
And to conclude our debate, I'd like to recognize Pavan Walia to deliver the negative rebuttal, not to exceed 5 minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, any scientific tool can be used for evil intentions or thought to be harmful. This one, however, in the case of GM foods, is not an evil tool. There is not a mad scientist with a long white lab coat with equally long white hair creating these GM foods. They are simply not all harmful, as we are talking about. As stated before, there are over 2,000 quality and reliable studies from the recent decade, as Nathan and Emma have both already pointed out, concluding that GM foods are not harmful and pose no detrimental threat to the environment, directly rejecting what the affirmative wants you to believe about genetically modified organisms. The affirmative is using scare tactics and conspiracy theories regarding the FDA simply to scare you all into thinking that labeling is needed for GM foods when they really pose no harm. One of the largest things that those anti-GM say is that there are not studies or enough studies done on GM foods. Therefore, we should label them. That is false. The affirmative does not recognize the reliability or the quantity of the studies that have been presented. The affirmative claims that the science is not in our favor, but in reality, there is tons out there. My guess is that there will never be sufficient evidence for the affirmative, as they already have a preconceived notion that GM products are bad. They will never accept any of the science. At the same time, the affirmative states that there are not long-term studies done on GMOs to prove if they are not safe or not. Thus, we must label them. Why give a completely harmless product the negative preconceived notion that a GMO label would give if we supposedly do not know the long-term effects? For example, if you were to walk into a store and picked up a product that had a label stating contains anthocyanins, you would be frightened by the product and be less likely to buy that product. This is despite the fact that anthocyanins are harmless and appear in much of our foods, much like GM products, which are also harmless and appear in much of our foods. Now that that's settled, let's dive deeper into why GM foods should not be labeled. One of the largest reasons why GM foods should not be labeled is because of their costs. About a month or so ago, Washington State alone took a vote on Initiative 522. The majority ruled they did not want GM foods labeled. The Washington Research Council conducted a study in which they took every aspect of the cost of labeling, and not just the regulatory aspect, as the affirmative has addressed, into account. And they found that it would increase costs by approximately $264 million. And that is in just Washington State alone. Can you imagine that nationwide? For a family of four, that averages about $200 to $520, raising approximately 50% of their food income. This is a disturbingly large amount of money that will be simply put to waste, as GM foods do not need to be labeled. For those of you who do want a non-GM product, there is a solution for you already in place. Buy organic labeled foods. Organic foods are non-GMO, thus solving the problem. But do not make the rest of us suffer the costs of the unnecessary labeling of GM foods. Let's take a minute to look at some stats done by Feeding America. In 2012 alone, 46 million Americans were in poverty, while 49 million Americans lived in food-insecure households, 33.1 million being adults and 15.9 being children. Innocent children and adults that are trying to make it by in this tough economy are already struggling. By labeling GM foods, these Americans who are already scraping up the last bit of money they have to afford cheap foods will potentially go hungry. If the cost numbers do average out, as the studies show, there will be an increase in those that live in food-insecure households. More Americans struggling with money will have to choose between food and water, food and electricity, food and shelter, food and other essentials of life. Do not let this happen. The affirmative claims that the Huffington Post said that low-income families will be willing to pay more to know what contains GM foods. I'd like to wager that. I believe that for education of a product, I believe someone would go out and actually inform themselves on the knowledge of a product. They don't need a label to be informative. They would educate themselves. Thank you.
So I'm going to turn the floor over to the man of the hour, Dr. Gerry Philipsen, to have some remarks about it. You can go up front if you wish. Okay. So this is the person for whom it's named, as we've spoken of. So
well, I'd like to take a negative position to something Dr. Souders just said. These are the men and women of the hour. What a thrill it was to listen to them. You know, some of the finest leaders we have in the state of Washington, people like the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tom Foley, former Governor Christine Gregoire, got their start in the Department of Communication debate program. We haven't had that for decades. What you heard tonight is proof. Debate is back. And thank you to Dr. Souders for giving us such a great start, for Margot Lippman, her work in making this possible, and to the debaters on the platform and all of you who were part of the preparation for this tonight. I'm just thrilled with what is happening. I'm thrilled for our university, I'm thrilled for our students, and I'm thrilled for the future of our state because of this great educational experience that has come back with such great force and such great excellence. It's hard to follow a debate. It's hard to flow a debate. It's hard to get all the points. I think we all experienced that tonight, not because of any deficiency of the debaters, but because of the complexity. But I felt that in each of these speeches that we heard, from Rachel, Emma, James, Nathan, Sean, Patham, that we heard flashes of brilliance in terms of their ability to persuade. We heard preparation and knowledge of the subject. We heard insightful analysis. And we found out some things about debate. I don't know about you, but for me, each speech I heard moved me. From the first to the sixth. And so it's like a great basketball game with two good teams. 1 minute, one is winning. The next minute, the other is winning. And the thing about debate, in a good debate, which we had tonight, we had an excellent debate tonight, every speaker met their responsibility to say what had to be said to keep our minds moving from the affirmative to the negative, from the affirmative to the negative, affirmative to the negative, and then give us the very difficult choice as audience members to make a judgment as to where we fall on this particular topic. And so, to me, debate is fun. It's intellectual fun. It's fun for smart people, or people who like to think they're smart. That's some of you, and me. But it's also, there's a deep insight that you get from listening to a debate. And that is that what you discover is that the first thing you heard gets complicated when you hear the second, and then the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth. And what you have to come away with from listening to a debate and participating in a debate is you come away with the reminder of how complicated truth can be in important matters. And we got a great lesson in that tonight. I like to think that my participation in debate, always looking at it from one side, then the other side, made me an open-minded man. I like to think many things. But I think we all got some instruction in how to be open-minded. So I'd like to commend these 6 debaters for starting this forum in such a brilliant and inspirational way. And I'd also like to acknowledge the audience here. What a great set of questions. I was given the opportunity to ask a question. I'm glad I was able to pass because I was still processing all the information. What a brilliant set of challenges, informed, articulate, polite, but persistent, enough edge to make it interesting, and great responses from our people on the platform. And the other thing is that none of these people who got up here and performed so beautifully for us tonight as they all did, none of those did it without help from their classmates and their teachers. And so there was a lot of contribution to what they did coming from their colleagues. So all I can say is that debate is back. It's back powerfully and beautifully, and thank you all. And I'm so grateful to Dr. Kutu for her wonderful remarks about me, and so grateful to my colleagues in the Department of Communication who gave me a great gift. You know, some people, when they retire, they're given a gold watch. This would be, you know, a gold watch would be nothing compared to the gift of that we have this forum. I was thrilled just that we had it, and then to think my name would be attached to it just made me feel a really lucky guy. It's great to see all of you, some of my former students in other classes, and I'm delighted that you've had a chance to have an experience of the art of debate. Thank you all.
I want to thank everyone here, the 334 students. As for the people who are here for the first time for this debate, know that they've been working on this for 6 weeks and put on 3 debates over that period of time. And all of the students here who are not observers, everyone here who is required to be here has been a part of developing these debates. And it's been a pretty big deal. It's been a pretty big odyssey. And when Margot and I came up with this idea, or Margot came up with the idea, and then I sort of ran with it and made her do a bunch of things I don't think she anticipated in the process. We didn't know how it was going to turn out, and it's turned out great. And Margot and I really appreciate it, and I am amazed at how well we've done considering the tiny amount of time we gave you to do it. So I appreciate you very much. Thank you for being here. This is something that's going to happen every year. I think you should give yourself a round of applause. Thank you very much. Great job, guys. Yeah. Fantastic. It came out so well. It came out great. I'm so happy. A little long, but
congratulations.
Thank you so much. It was actually really awesome to do this. Nerve-wracking.
Absolutely. Always nerve-wracking.
Yeah, so. There was going to be a things got busy.